welcome to CharityVillage Connects. The global pandemic has been tough on the nonprofit sector. Mental health issues and burnout is leading to some nonprofit professionals making the decision to leave the sector. Our guest, Raksha Bhayana, a former social services professional, recognized this was already a problem before COVID hit. In 2005, Raksha launched a national awards program to celebrate exceptional work in the social services, to publicly recognize workers who were often overlooked and underappreciated. Today, her vision has expanded to include advocating for governments across Canada to designate an official day of recognition for the social services. Full disclosure for our audience, Charity Village has been a proud partner in the promotion of these initiatives. We wanted to hear from Raksha why this public recognition is so important for the mental health and resilience of nonprofit professionals, what the extent of the problem is, and what are some of the solutions. Welcome, Raksha.
Thank you, Mary. It's been great to have Charity Village and you as a partner as we traveled across Canada to do the videos.
Well, again, we really are very proud to be part of the initiative. We think it's super important, but we'd love to hear from you. You tell me that you've enjoyed a long career in the social services. Can you briefly describe your own experience with burnout while you were working in the sector?
At the time, I was the Director of Professional Services at a GTA organization. We had a peak of 300 staff, and we provided services from cradle to grave, from children to seniors. And what had been going on for some years was a sort of erosion of the revenue from various critical sources, and we were busy trying to get more funds. And what happens in that process is that it's kind of an insidious thing. It creeps up, and there's a sense of a mental fog. You know, you're used to supporting staff as a director who are dealing with really very vulnerable people, whether it's abused women or children who have been sexually abused, or seniors who are isolated, or people with severe mental health and addiction problems. And what happens is you're giving incessantly, and there's a sense of you don't have any more to give. You're depleted, and your productivity goes down. You can't understand. You're trying to do more. So the mental fog, the sense of not being efficient becomes all pervasive, and it's a really tough spot to be in.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's so important for me to understand, and I think for our audience to really get a sense of what the nonprofit professionals might be experiencing in their work. And certainly that's come to be more greatly highlighted with the public attention as a result of COVID-19 hitting Canada. After the pandemic hit in Canada in early 2020, it really became much clearer that the nonprofit sector was being particularly hard hit, with the organizations and professionals being uniquely vulnerable. Can you describe what you learned about the impact on mental health in the past year and a half?
I think it was a combination of a real instability and uncertainty, because none of us knew, and that was, pretty much across all sectors, of what was going to happen next. How long would this last? And the fact that there had to be, without many resources, immediate digital transformation. You couldn't see anybody, so you had to go digital. You didn't have the resources to be able to do that, so you had to really improvise as much as you could. The demands, as most people know, more Canadians went to social services and human services than ever before. And the staff were working 24/7 to respond. And I think the other thing that was happening at that time is that it was also an opportunity, a time for opportunity, when people took on innovation in a new way. Let me give you an example of one of the award winners. Kids couldn't go to school. A lot of parents didn't have the time because they were working from home to actually support the kids. They created these resilience kits, which included things like a monster complaint bag, and included things like what is good nutrition, how to connect with your friends without actually seeing them, how to play with your friends. It gave the kids a sense of control. And they started out as a pilot for 2 schools and ended up having to expand because they were so popular. So it was definitely a very tough time, but it was also a time where many organizations did really innovated in some new ways. Now, domestic violence and partner abuse really increased enormously, and there were some very tough situations where women were fleeing one province and coming to another province. And then the question was that the Crown needed to have the women go to a safe space to give their testimony via video. A lot of the organizations, the shelters, provided that safe space and the support that these women and their families needed. So yes, there was enormous, sense of relentless demand. And I think the burnout also came not only because they were working so hard, because these are caring people and they will go every day beyond, but they couldn't respond. There were waiting lists and they didn't like that. And that was something that they had to then innovate on again. So it was a combination of things.
Right, and a lot of the frontline workers are also experiencing what has been called vicarious trauma, which is common in the frontline workers under normal circumstances, but was, exacerbated with the challenges that the pandemic brought on. Could you describe, what you saw in that regard?
There was a sense of hopelessness that they could never actually respond adequately to the needs. Some people had to take a break. They really had to leave at that point, not permanently, but for a period of time. And not being able to respond, for example, to a woman who has been abused or a senior who's isolated. There were some very, very powerful incidents of across the country, information coming from BC that there's a senior who's isolated and hasn't eaten for 6 days. The impact that has on a caring, and most if not all of the people who work in the sector are extremely caring, is enormous. Because you feel for the senior who hasn't eaten for 6 days and suddenly found a way to get that information out. It's like an ongoing drumbeat, Mary, that it never goes away because people are so vulnerable. People who are disabled, they were locked in. What were they going to do? And couldn't see people. So the isolation also affected. I think a lot of the agencies began to recognize that, the leadership, and they began to do workshops, well-being workshops for the staff, as well as the managers. It's not like the managers were any less burnt out over the year. Particularly because there was no fundraising, and more than 50% of the nonprofits rely on community fundraising. They're very attached to the community and the community to them. So, and they had times where they said meeting-free zones. There are no more meetings. There's just a break because you go from one Zoom meeting to another, to another, to another. So I think they did very well, but it certainly was very tough.
It sure was. Now, for decades, you've been a fierce advocate for more public awareness of the hard work being done by people working in the social services sector with the Bhayana Family Foundation Awards. Can you share your vision for the awards and what motivated you to start them?
My first career was, as you've mentioned, in the nonprofit sector. And when I left and went to the private sector, I was really floored. I mean, I couldn't believe the number of awards that existed for practically every industry. And so I guess somewhere in my subconscious that started. And then an opportunity came a few years later when we IPO'd our company and decided to create a foundation. And And then it was a no-brainer. I mean, what were the niche that we were going to occupy was the awards for the frontliners of the sector. Because I'd been there, I knew the incessant demands that were on the sector and the amount of emotional toll that it took on them. So I think the other thing, Mary, honestly, was the undervaluing of the sector. It's sort of like, oh yeah, you work in the social service, so big deal. It was never, there was no esteem attached to working in the sector. And we always had public ceremonies with either politicians or influencers being the keynote in order to increase the esteem and the recognition of the economic contribution and the numbers. I mean, 11% of Canada's workforce works in the nonprofit sector, and they contribute almost $200 billion annually. Nobody recognizes that because they're paid so little, but they do so much.
Right. What a important lesson for you to have learned as a learned experience, as part of your life experience, but also as a result of focusing on celebrating these people as part of national awards. Can you tell me what else you learned about the sector and the people who work in it as a result of hosting these awards?
You know, there's a lot of surveys that have been done in the for-profit sector on the value of recognition. And I don't think I really understood that until these awards began to happen. And there are many, many stories, and I think the best way is to give you a quote from one of the recipients. Our compelling story isn't one single story or incident. Our story is about how during the time of working from home, experiencing phases of isolation, showing up for clients every day while using virtual platforms to connect with your team, this award brought our team together. This award acknowledged the incredibly difficult conversations that have every day that we have with clients and how each of those conversations make a difference and have impact to our community. It showed the significance of their efforts and relationships. There were some co-workers who were crying with so much pride and joy for getting this recognition. It was overwhelming and made them feel that they were also recognized. So recognition is well known to, in fact, reignite motivation. People work harder after they get recognized. It's a validation. It increases engagement and of course, productivity. So I don't think I realized that, you know. There was another young man, there are not many men in the sector, who came up to me after an award ceremony and he said, I just want to tell you my story. He said, there are 3 sons in our family. My oldest brother is an investment banker and he's seen as being very successful. The second brother is in real estate and he's seen as successful, but I'm in the nonprofit sector and I'm seen as a loser. But the awards made me feel like a winner. So that's the validation that they get, and the public recognized by politicians and the peers is very, very important. It inspires other people.
I couldn't agree with you more. Does the public recognition given with the awards also help professionals deal with their burnout and mental health issues that they may be experiencing both before COVID but also afterwards? What have you seen?
Well, we had a recent awards ceremony, and the evaluation feedback affirms that at least for a period of time, the ceremony itself, the fact that influencers and politicians, we had the last ceremony, we had about 15 politicians come because it was virtual and it's much easier, to attend. We had about a couple of hundred people as well. They felt really important. It was like they're 5 minutes in the spotlight. And so it certainly works, but it's not enough. They need the kind of mental health supports within their work environment, which many organizations are trying to give them time off. make sure that their schedules are realistic and that they don't themselves burn themselves out, which is often the case. It's not management expectation, it's their own internal drivers that lead them to work hard. It's sort of like, you go on an airline and you get an oxygen mask. The expectations from management need to be very realistic. That's the oxygen mask for people. So it's a combination of things. Yes, the awards help, but within their organizations, they need a culture that recognizes that there are limits to what they can do. I don't want to give the impression that the leadership in nonprofits are not sensitive. They are. They are. The number of executive directors and CEOs that I've talked to, they're really often burned out themselves too, because it's an ongoing process. They not only have to manage themselves and their funders and the complexity of getting funds, but also their staff. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Right. It's certainly important that there are realistic expectations around them, and in terms of what every human being, including their managers, can possibly give as part of the mandate to deliver on their mission. And in terms of your mission, you've certainly been involved in taking this public recognition to a much higher level with your latest initiatives to lobby governments across Canada to institute an official day of recognition for workers in the social services. How did that get started?
It got started when I was asked a couple of years ago when the Senate had a committee on the charitable sector, and I was invited to do a presentation, and thought about it a lot and thought, well, what can I offer that is different than the many other think tanks and leaders who are going to present. And I said, what I have to offer is stories from the grassroots in terms of what people are doing, and ask for a national day of recognition after sharing the stories. So one of the senators afterwards, so I made the recommendation for a national day, and the feedback that I was given was that it would be much better to start at the provincial level and work our way up. So the Nova Scotia, the Halifax Awards were happening very soon after that, so I started there. And the short story on that is that at the time I was on the TELUS Community Advisory Group for the GTA, and I made contact with the chair of the TELUS Atlantic Advisory Group, and that happened to be the former Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia. So she was the keynote at our award ceremony. She was very taken with the whole process and offered to help. And so with her help, United Way Halifax, the Community Sector Council of Nova Scotia, and politicians from every, there was a Liberal government at that time, and from the NDP and the PC party, we were able to get the first historic day of recognition in Nova Scotia, and it happened October 14th of last year.
Well, I attended too. I was very, very proud of your achievement, and very touched by the stories that were shared at that event, and would love to hear more about what some of your other achievements in that regard are. You've made such amazing progress. Where are you now at your initiative to take it Canada-wide?
Right now, we are hopefully at the tail end of the advocacy in Ontario. The process in Ontario is different than Nova Scotia. We're going through a private member's bill, which has to be championed by a PC MPP. And we have that. It has passed second reading in the Ontario legislature unanimously, and is scheduled to go to the legislature for third and hopefully final reading, fingers crossed, in September. So the bill has designated the week of October 18th as the week of appreciation. The MPP who championed it wanted not a day, but a week. And the reason, because she felt that it would be important for MPPs who wish to do so to go back to their ridings and celebrate with the nonprofits.
So actually going back to the grassroots to celebrate this recognition in the place where they deliver their services.
Yeah, that's right.
So tell me about the next steps that you're contemplating or are already in the works to take the Day of Recognition or Week of Recognition nationwide.
Well, we've just started the process in Alberta in partnership with the United Way Calgary. And they've hired a consultant to help them. So it's early days, and so we're hoping that we'll be able to move this forward in Alberta, and the next step then would be BC. I hope the next step is then national.
So tell us about your ultimate goals for this initiative. Yes, we want to make sure that this is a nationwide initiative, a day of recognition across Canada for the social services, but beyond the actual day, what do you hope to achieve by having this instituted?
I see, we see it as foundational, Mary. The public is not aware of the role that economic and social, they're aware on some levels of social, but not of the economic at all. So certainly public awareness is very important. The next step is really decent work. The majority of the workforce does not make a decent wage. They can't live on it. There was a survey that was done by Imagine Canada, and it's really concerning, a few years ago, that and they asked young people whether they would consider a career in the nonprofit sector, and almost 67% said no, never. Why? Because they couldn't sustain a family on the wages that were made. So I'm hoping this will be foundational. There are a number of organizations, including Ontario Nonprofit Network, that has been working on decent work. So that is our next level. We want to work with existing organizations, and thereafter, it's really the esteem. Why is it that we value those people who sell products? And I have nothing against it. We have a furniture manufacturing company, and we award those who sell more. But people who help people are equally important, if not more important. And that's what we're hoping, maybe not in my lifetime, but over generations, that there will be recognition that those who help people are as important, at least as important, if not more important, than those who sell products and services.
That's really a profound observation and a very laudable goal, and I certainly hope that we achieve it in your lifetime and thereafter. But let's go back to some practical ideas. Could you give some advice, both from your experience of being a leader in the nonprofit sector, but also your experience in being part of these initiatives to celebrate the great work of the social services? Do you have advice for leaders of nonprofit organizations? What steps that they can take to help support their people, particularly during this very difficult time?
Most, if not all, of the leaders are doing excellent work. At the macro level, Imagine Canada, along with United Way Suntrade, Community Foundations of Canada, they've had a collaborative. And for the first time, I think probably that I can recall, they have been very successful with the federal government. The budget this year had more money to support nonprofits because they were aware of the erosion of the revenue and the fact that up to 30%, maybe 40% of nonprofits would no longer exist after the pandemic. So they were very, very successful with the advocacy, and I have to applaud what they've done. So it has never happened before, and in fact, they were able to, for the first time, in the federal budget, add an index called the Quality of Life Index. So we will be looking not just at the GDP, which is an important number, but the Quality of Life Index. And how that's going to be measured is still to be worked out. But, there's been some very, very successful advocacy thus far. I think most leaders are aware that up to 40 to 50% of their workforce is burnt out. They know that. All the Imagine Canada surveys, the Community Sector Council of Nova Scotia did a survey last year. they're showing that the workers are burnt out. So they're doing a range of things, including, as I mentioned, the well-being, giving them time off, recognition, a whole range of things that are being done. And of course, realistic expectations. So I just applaud what they're doing, honestly, because I think, and I just want to share one more thing. United Way Greater Toronto has done something really, really special, which I want to share. So one of the things that we do is the foundation, our foundation gives donations for the external awards, but we also give it for the internal United Way, whether it's Halifax or it's Calgary or it's Lower Mainland. And what United Way has done has created a model where almost every day somebody gets recognized. So if the only mess, and they do it annually and quarterly, and they're small things, but there's research that shows that people who, are they're craving a compliment from their manager. And if they don't get it, that's actually a reason why they leave. Not just monetary incentives. There's a lot of research that shows that. So it's a small thing. It can be a card, and that's what they do. So I just think if our sector can do more of that, take the time to recognize what your staff are doing frequently, not once a year.
Well, that's a great example of the ripple effect that you've had, and that must be very satisfying. Do you have any final thoughts you want to leave with our audience?
I would just reiterate what I said, two things. One is that what these invisible champions, the frontline workers, do provides value beyond money. And I hope that people will realize that those people who care for people who are vulnerable, and we can all be vulnerable at different times in our lives, that they're worth your esteem.
And if there's people in our audience, and I'm sure there are many, many listening who might want to support you in these initiatives to recognize workers in the social services, what can they do to support you?
They can help us with our advocacy for a Ontario Day, for a Alberta Day, for a Vancouver Day, and then for a National Day. Go to our website, bff.org, and sign our petition.